1, 2, 3, 4. Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go. Hello and welcome to Pedagogy a Go-Go, a podcast about college faculty sharing what happens in their classrooms and why. This is Season 2, Episode 5, guiding our students through our difficult history, and we are your hosts, Gina Turner and Tom O'Connor.
So holy fork and shirt balls, Gina. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So it's good to see you again.
Yes, it's happy to be back. It's happy to be back.
It is happy to be back. Whoever it may be, it could be the Demigorgon in like the back room.
The committee.
The royal we.
No spoilers,
the Addams
but
family.
to quote the last episode of The Good Place.
So, which I haven't seen.
I know.
Stop.
That's why no spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
So we are here today to talk to my office mate.
Just come right in there. Be like, I know more than Tom.
I don't know. I'm hanging on by a thread today.
Hey, welcome audience to Pedagogy a Go-Go. We are super excited today to have you here. Our guest today is Brian Allnutt. He's a professor of history here. I'm going to introduce him a little bit more in a bit. But before I do anything else, I gave you some extra credit to do, and I am a terrible friend / co-host / professor because I don't even remember what I gave because it's been like how many months since we recorded an episode.
I know. Well, I crammed yesterday and re-listened to the end of our last episode so that I would know what.
You had to re-listen to the end of the episode.
I totally
and then
had
did
to
your
re-listen.
work at the last minute.
Yes. So to paraphrase you, it was basically following off of Karen and Kate from our last podcast talking about adjusting for, in particular, non-neurotypical students in the classroom. And specifically, sometimes you think you've got this foolproof plan in the classroom and you realize, oh man, this is not going to work in this situation. I got to regroup and I got to figure out a new plan here. So you would kind of ask me to think about times if I have had that experience, which of course happens pretty much every day, but that experience of thinking you've got something foolproof, it does not work, and what am I going to do instead?
God,
and so
I asked a damn good question.
It was a really
and then
good
immediately forgot it.
It was a really good question, and I am serious because I feel like that is just the job of teaching is constantly trying to figure out, oh, wow, how am I going to make this work for this group or in this context or given that, X, Y, and Z happen. But I'm going to go with kind of the biggest slap in the face that I ever had professionally in this job, which was when I first started here at NCC. And I think I've alluded to this story before because I never forget it. I don't mean to make light of PTSD, but I think I have flashbacks to my first semester at Northampton because my students hated me. They absolutely hated me. I got bad evaluations. And I was coming off of teaching. I'd been teaching for 5 years at my alma mater, which is a university in New York City. And having been getting good evaluations and having loved teaching and wanting it to be my career. So I was coming off of teaching 1 or 2 classes a semester, right, while I was finishing my dissertation. And I was also working part-time in administrative office. And it was kind of like I already sort of had my dream job, but I knew it wasn't going to last forever once I graduated. So I found this new job where I was, oh boy, I get to be in the classroom 5 classes? Wow, that's a lot of classes. And I got in those 5 classes and I tried to bring to bear what had worked for me at New School for 5 years, and they hated it. They hated me. They hated the way I presented the material. They hated the tests. They didn't think there was enough homework, which I was like, what? Huh? Because they wanted more opportunities to earn points than I was giving them. It was just a disaster. And one of my classes hated me so much that they made me nervous. So because I could tell that it wasn't working, I got nervous. I know I've talked about this on the podcast before. I think I have. That was when I got dinged for. They counted how many times I used in a lecture. And then on the evaluations, a group of them all wrote that in the comments of my evaluations.
But I did that the first time we recorded this podcast, and I listened to myself, and I thought, like, 1, 2, 3, that's low. That's something we do to ourselves in our deepest, darkest moments. That's
It was painful. So I had a wonderful meeting with my dean, worrying I was going to get fired. I mean, I was sobbed my way home and sobbed over winter break about this. I'm not going to lie. And it ended up with a meeting with my wonderful dean, and then reached out to the students to ask them for their feedback. And it's taken me 11 years, and I still feel like I'm constantly tweaking in the face of that, and to the point where I almost feel like now there are too many moving parts in the class, because I'm so worried and constantly fainting and constantly trying to readjust. So it is really interesting how feedback at the right time or at the wrong time or at a pivotal time can really impact you. And it also, to wrap up this long-winded therapy session, it also made me incredibly sensitive to giving feedback to students and just to any people in life. Like, I am never going to be the person who writes mean comments on the internet because I know what it feels like to read those mean comments. So
well, as the analysand in this connection, just lay back in the couch and allow me to do work my Freudian.
More of a
method.
cognitive behavioralist.
Oh. So, like, I just want to first just thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because, like, I want every new teacher in like a new environment to perk your heads up, because as someone who supervises like 150 adjuncts, many of them come in green. Most of them do not have a secondary ed background in teaching.
Mm-hmm.
They're teaching by the examples that come before them,
right?
And they come in with it, either with anxieties or with a set idea of how things work. And they come to the end of the first semester, and they've gotten some feedback from me, but then they see those IRQs and they freak out. Mm-hmm. And like, and sometimes they're like you're described. Sometimes it's one or two feedback, like
mm-hmm.
pieces of feedback that just feel really nasty and personal. And we have to remember that we can learn from that, and that we also can't become overly comfortable in the classroom. Like, I talk about this a lot with my women and gender studies class, but I think it's with any class that anyone's teaching. We should always be, what did you say, fainting and kind of like jumping around and kind of being on the balls of your feet and your toes, as you try to kind of assess in the moment and through the course of a class, like what's working, and having to constantly change that, because no two classes are the same,
right?
And certainly no two demographics of students, even across when you move across schools, like and I had the same experience coming from Lehigh, teaching there, now teaching here,
right?
Two very different groups of students,
right?
Different
Absolutely.
Things work.
Yeah, it was a very different population of students. I also was teaching in their adult ed division. It's sort of, New School has sort of an interesting structure that is too boring to go into, but so I had a lot of adult students, returning students, as opposed to batches of 18-year-olds. I had 18 students in a classroom, so we could just sit and have a discussion, as opposed to 36 students in a classroom where it had to be a lot more structured. So yeah, being able to take that step back and look objectively about why the fit wasn't happening either is really an important thing to do. And that's again where I have to give a shout out to my dean, Christine Pence, because she really helped me to be able to look at specifically what objectively I might have been experiencing, right? And that it wasn't just that I was a terrible human being.
Well, thank you for doing such an amazing job with an assignment that I forgot I gave.
So do I get double extra credit?
You get all the extra credit in the world. Like, it's just insta A.
Yay!
So without further ado, I want to bring in our guest, Professor of History, Brian Allnutt. He's been a professor here at Northampton Community College for 11 years and taught at Kutztown University before that. So he's experienced teaching at four-year universities as well as 2-year community colleges. He's also out in the community teaching local history. He presents at the Historical Association of Tobyhanna Township, and as well as I know he teaches closer to me in Monroe County with the Older Adult Learning Center out of East Stroudsburg. So an all-around talented professor. He teaches at both of our campuses, so I get to work with him, and you are his office mate.
Yes, indeedy.
So we're so excited to have him here with us today.
Yes, it should be a great conversation. If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be? No one's gonna.
Is that door locked?
Yes, exactly right.
There's no escape.
Well, speaking of ambushes,
Okay.
we should ambush you immediately by saying, welcome, Brian. It's a surprise ambush. It's surprisingly kind.
It's very kind.
We lead you in with kindness, and then we throw the rug out from under you.
Okay, happy to be here.
So welcome to the studio. And so
Right.
we're going to hit you up with a question that we begin with for everyone, which
Okay.
is, what do you teach here at NCC as a
Okay.
professor of history, and why do you teach?
I teach history, primarily American history, but I sometimes go overseas. I'm doing Middle East history this semester, which I've done before. Most of my stuff's American. That's where my grad training was. And I teach because I love history, and I think it's important to spread historical knowledge. And one of the things that actually got me interested in this as an academic was in my previous life in the corporate world and just general. I began hearing amazing ignorance among the general public of historical topics, completely uninformed, including people during one of the various Iraq crises saying, well, I don't know. Where is Iraq? Is that the same thing as Palestine? And this Saudi, like what's that? Where is that? I don't know. And these are apparently well-informed people with not a clue. And I had a sense of real, I think, mission to try to spread historical knowledge, because I think it's necessary to be a useful citizen, to have knowledge of history and know why we are where we are, because you can't understand that until you know what happened before, like how we got here. That's essential grounding for the world we live in today.
Did you have interest in history even in your other job? And do you mind
Yeah.
telling us a little bit
Yeah.
about your previous life?
I'll
in
give
the
my
corporate
whole
world?
backstory. I always was interested in history, and back in the high school level, I went to like a small prep type high school, along with Professor Julie Houston, by the way, who's my office mate at Monroe campus. We went to the same small high school.
Where was this located?
Morristown Friends School in, yes, you can put the blame there. Morristown Friends School in South Jersey.
Okay.
It's a Quaker prep school.
We're just digging for dirt in Julie Houston.
I didn't
actually,
know
who we
her
should say
then.
is an English professor.
She's
here.
an English professor at the Monroe campus. Yeah, she was a few grades ahead of me, so we didn't know each other back then. But just by coincidence, this is one of the most strange things. We ended up as office mates at Monroe campus. And we didn't realize we'd gone to the same school until we'd shared the office for a year. And it came up in casual conversation. And we were both like stunned by that.
That's crazy.
In any case, it was a very good school. And history back then was bundled with social studies. And I was always interested in that. And when I got to college, Muhlenberg College, I selected history as my major because of interest. And I didn't plan to be involved in academic history. My plan was to be involved in, believe it or not, like corporate advertising, communication stuff. But Muhlenberg didn't have a department like that. I wanted to go to the college. They didn't have that department. And I thought history sort of was two birds with one stone. It would bolster my writing skills, which it did, communication skills. And secondly, it matched an interest of mine, a strong interest. So I was a history major at Muhlenberg, graduated, went into the sort of company world, never quite got where I wanted to be. I was hoping to be involved in maybe a marketing or ad agency, and that's very difficult to do. So I didn't achieve that. And actually, I'm sort of glad I didn't, because I realized the industry is very unstable. It's actually not a very comfortable place to spend your career. Anyway, I did get involved in corporate communications with American Express up in Boston, of all places, doing communication with banking clients of an operation they had up there. So I did that for 3 years. Then I came back here and worked at the Morning Call for about 3 years, once again in advertising communication. And I didn't mind the corporate world at all. If anyone's ever seen the movie called Office Space, ever seen that? It was just like that. And I didn't mind. I
embraced Michael Bolton's entire catalog.
Oh yeah. Was it Lerman? If you could put the TPS reports with the tan cover, that'd be great. And it is just like that. I did notice though, and this was disappointing, that beyond office talk, these relatively intelligent people working there had nothing to talk about except sports. and that was pretty much it. It was either sports or office talk. I'd say 90% sports.
Or the weather.
Or the weather, yeah, but nothing of any depth of sophistication. So through twists and turns, I ended up getting involved and deciding to go back into academic history. So returning to my undergrad major, 20 some years after graduating, and then I did get my degree and my doctorate, which was really satisfying. I'll tell you, when I was first entering the program at Lehigh, meeting with my guy who became my advisor there, walking into his office and seeing his books, like his bookshelves, it was like a kid in a candy store. It's like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. This is what I want to immerse myself in. There was that immediate reaction. So I liked the grad school program, and I felt, as I said, a sense of mission to disseminate the word to the rising generation, disseminate history, and that's kind of what I do. And I find it really satisfying.
Yeah, it's as someone who also went out in the corporate world and then came back to school, I love what you say about walking back into academia and just seeing those shelves of books in what you're interested in. And then I also want to point out that a lot of your research has to do with South Jersey, right?
Right.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Okay. Well, I've done some research on Jersey. It's my home state. I'm from South Jersey. Well, I was born in Philadelphia, which I try to emphasize to my students. Because especially at Monroe campus, I see a lot of Yankees caps on people. And I always am asking, where's the red Phillies caps? Where's my red Phillies caps? I'm from there. And, I've done some research in the Philadelphia area, a little bit on South Jersey, and just wrote an article about New Jersey civil rights. And it's provided a lot of rich stuff for research, some rich information. There's a lot more to Mid-Atlantic studies than people think. And I'm also involved in the Pennsylvania Historical Association, which is faculty from across Pennsylvania that do research in Pennsylvania and Delaware Valley history. So a lot to mine there. Interesting background I'll put up here, personal. My father, now this is my original father, it was a divorce. So I was raised by a stepfather. But my original dad is from a tribal group in South Jersey called the Nanaco Glenni Lenape. It is what you call a triracial Native American group, and there's quite a few of those up and down the East Coast, little clusters of people that were originally native settlements, and the natives died out pretty fast, disease. But whites and blacks married into these settlements, and then they became very cohesive, and that's one of them. So I didn't grow up with them because of the divorce situation, but I know them, and I think it informs some of my teaching, and I do bring it up in class, actually quite a bit. And because I think it's interesting to have that sort of perspective, especially on the Mid-Atlantic and on American settlement. If anyone's curious, you'll find groups like that from Rhode Island, right down to the Carolinas, Maryland, up and down the coast. These little clusters of people, and they were very cohesive and sort of insular for a while. In today's world, they're kind of breaking up. People are moving all across the country, so it's not like it was. But that's kind of part of my background.
Is there a particular region of history to that local area that you're interested in? I know that we as literature people love to divide things into modern, early.
Yeah. I haven't done much actual direct study on these communities. Other folks have done. I haven't probed into it. My field that I teach is everything from colonial up until current day. I think the area that I've really found a lot of interest in is late 19th century, early 20th century, that turn of the century period. It's interesting because it's a very modernizing time in American and world life. When I say modernizing, I mean all the technologies we're used to today, electricity, motor transportation, photography, cinema, all is present. But the thinking, the intellectual climate is very different. It's not necessarily the most pleasant period of time. You're seeing reformist tendencies. The progressives are arising with thoughts about improving society, but also a lot of very hard-hitted social Darwinism. If anyone knows the Horatio Alger book series, Make It on Your Own, or basically fall by the wayside, racial thinking was probably at its lowest point at that point. Very, very harsh racial ideologies. Pretty much
until today, of course.
Well,
I know, right? What you're describing sounds a little bit like what we hear in the news now.
We made some progress.
Yes, we
really
have made some.
On both sides of the Atlantic, racial thinking was incredibly stark at that time, and we can get more into that later in this discussion. But that's something we get into deeply in my American History 2 class, which is Reconstruction till the Present, and we always discuss that. And issues about immigration to this country specifically, which we can get into a bit by bit. But I may as well go there right now.
Yeah, I was going to say.
One thing that pops up is immigration, and nativism and xenophobia. And I put together a little montage of cartoons that reflect these different ages, and I have one that shows shows horrendous caricatured Irish Catholics crawling up on the American shore, and that's from the mid-19th century, Irish immigration. I have one that shows Uncle Sam glowering at Castle Garden in Manhattan, which is right before Ellis Island. European immigrants of the 1890s coming off the boat, and these are Eastern and Southern Europeans, drawn as, dirty, crawling, beetle-browed with almost caveman features, and labeled with things like Italian vagabond, Polish hobo, actually carrying these labels on their hats, Uncle Sam glowering them. And I have cartoon showing, up to typical today's anti-Mexican cartoon. And so a discussion is we have waves of xenophobia in this country, and we keep repeating it. And my students, actually, I don't need to tell them that. When I show them this and discuss it, they volunteer right away. Seems like we're always doing this. Well, yeah, it does seem like that. This comes in waves like that.
It's interesting, though, because I was talking about the waves of immigration in one of my classes a couple of years ago. And one of my students who had identified himself, this was before the election, and he'd sort of identified himself as a Trump supporter. Really, really smart kid, really engaged student in the class. And then I was talking about the waves of immigration, and he had a name that to me sounded like he was of Italian descent. And I was talking about the waves of Italian immigration, and he left the class. And to this day, I didn't get a chance to ask him what was going on with that. But
so not just that single class, he actually withdrew from the class.
He left the class.
Yes.
Withdrew from the course over that issue.
Yeah. Now, again, I don't know if it was because of that, but he left the class in the middle of the discussion and then never came back.
I think we can make a pretty clear association that that's probably what tipped him off.
It was really interesting, though, to see how, there are a lot of people who are very threatened by that idea that their ancestors might have been treated in these ways. So
Exactly.
it must be really challenging.
We go right there. there. And no one's luckily
Well, this is
been
what
offended.
good historians do, right?
Yeah,
They
exactly
hold
right.
a mirror up to ourselves
Right.
and force us to ask these
Right.
questions. And we have to, sometimes we're up to the task, and sometimes, as in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to avoid, there's a problem in history called presentism, where you take today's values and beliefs and bring them into the past and judge the past that way. And that's one of the challenges because some individuals in the past and some events are very abhorrent. They simply are to us. And you're constantly, and historians wrestle with this. There's no clear answer. Do you judge these things by the standards of the time in which laying out a wild ethnic accusation against a group would be standard procedure? And do you look at that and say, well, that actor, individual who did that isn't really so, quote, bad because that's just how it was at that time? Or do you withhold judgment for someone who stands out as exceptionally bad, beyond the standard at that time? On the other hand, do you judge them by today's standards and say, well, that is simply disgusting and it should have been known to them, and we're appalled that that person said that or did that. That's the problem of presentism in history.
Yeah, it's a great point because it requires the ability to kind of hold contradictions in your head and to apply nuance to looking at things, which sometimes we don't have the space and time to do.
Yeah.
And I know that you really enjoy those kinds of conversations. And sometimes I'll be sitting in my office and I'll hear some video where people are saying wild things.
Oh, yes.
And Brian's saying, oh yeah, I'm going to show this in class today.
I do.
So this kind of brings me to my next question, which is, so you love that lively, bringing up things that are controversial. Can you label yourself with one word that you might use to define yourself as a teacher and why you would use that word?
I can. Okay, two or three words. A guide, I think, is probably the best one. And something that actually came from one of my kids when they were in college. I have 4 kids who are now all post-college. The word explain. And what this person said was, I can go there twice because I was told this by a student here also. We love when you explain what was going on to us, and that doesn't mean I, exhort them or, direct them in a particular direction. It means I explain things that they really don't understand, help them unravel this. And so I'm a guide and explainer, and I think that really kind of, they're not maybe not the most eloquent terms, but that explains what I do and what I think my role is, you know. And in terms of technique, let's go to technique. I actually do a lot of lecturing that's not really pure lecturing because it's more of a conversation. I developed a technique that seems to work very well and develops a good rapport with students. They're coming in cold. They've read the book, but you know that's their basic knowledge. And most of my students have very little historical knowledge. So I do need to explain, there's that word again, you know, what's going on, which I will do. But it's not standing there and just throwing things at them. It's a conversation, a two-way. I might call on people. So what do you think? What's this mean to you? And then we'll have a conversation back and forth. So it's me presenting info, and then during the entire course of this class, soliciting feedback and discussing with individuals. What do you think about this? Where might this be going? And especially, how does this tie into today? You know, one of the points about history is that it builds to today's world. You know, so I'm always making associations between what happened then and today, and it seems like you couldn't. We're talking about, in some cases, like James Monroe, very old, early 19th century stuff, but it actually does connect very clearly.
So in some respects, you kind of employ both of the tactics, which is a contextual understanding of the past.
Right.
So that they understand the means in which people we assume that they thought in the day by what they were surrounded by,
Right.
versus taking that modern lens to it and saying, are there parallels that we see, or how might we view this from today's society?
Exactly right.
I want to ask for some... You did begin to nuance this notion of explaining, and it's interesting. I had a moment of resistance to it because I immediately went to these kind of dominant explanatory models, like this is what happened in why style teaching. And the way that you're describing is not that at all.
No.
You're offering explanations for, it sounds like, processes or things that they might not understand
Right.
in order to lead them to more nuanced conversations.
Exactly. We're trying to unravel what to them are very tightly wound skeins of facts that, you know, they really aren't able to follow very clearly unless I explain once again kind of how this all links together, but not dictating causality or, you know, giving one interpretation, because in history you really can't do that. You really need to open the doors to what happened, you know, cause and effect. You know, this seems to have led to that, but there's other reasons too, and have them kind of trace it themselves. You know, you have to kind of trust the students. And I just mentioned they come in rather cold in terms of knowledge, but they're not cold in terms of intelligence. They're able to quickly grab onto ideas and for themselves like trace this, and it's really fun to see that happening. The spark begin to happen, and it does almost every class. You know, someone will make these, you know, so that's, you know, that's how it works. Or that, you know, and it's really neat to see that kind of effect take off. So I think it's a lively situation. What I have to do, like everyone has to do, is make sure that I locate everyone in the classroom and bring them into the conversation. You've always got your quiet ones or your backseat ones, you know, and I don't let them get away. You know, it's like, and if I don't know the names early in the semester, which I don't, I will say, and I'll tell them, I'm going to be rude here. I don't know your name.
Become the auctioneer, you in the green hat.
I'm going to say that. I'll tell them. I'm going to say, hey, you back there, because I don't know your names yet. And they're fine with that. Then they start chuckling. And I will say, you in the Phillies hat, you, what do you think about that? You know, and I'll get some reaction. And so it's bringing everyone in. And then, you know, it's also neat having them react to each other. So it's always a lively sort of unpredictable brew of what's going to happen.
So one of our questions deals with actually how you teach, and which you've been answering all along. So I'm going to ask you to answer it in a slightly different way, given a conversation we were speaking a little bit before we began recording about ethnic slurs.
Sure.
And so you're touching on activating student voices, some of those quiet, more reserved students. When you have like a contentious idea, how do you talk about something that is potentially rife with problems, right? Yeah. While also activating those voices and engaging them in sometimes difficult conversations.
Yeah, that's a tough issue. In history, you deal with that all the time. I mean, in American history, you have to, any kind of history, because you're going to some very unpleasant places, you know. And I oftentimes tell them when the class is beginning, you know, I'm a very casual speaker. I'll say, this is going to be rough. We're going to see some mayhem here. You ready for that? This is going to be prepared for some rough stuff here. And if there is a class that's going to have some rough content, I'll say, there's going to be some tough stuff here. It's not a trigger warning. I'm not going to say, you know, it's not, I don't come at them with that sense of delicacy. I think I respect them by being kind of casual about it, and by letting them know something's coming, you know. And ideas, for instance, Thomas Jefferson's racial ideas. Some of us know they're pretty hardcore. We have them read the documents he wrote, Notes in the State of Virginia, which contain all kinds of racial insults. They just simply do about African Americans. And then we have them discuss what do we think about that? How do we evaluate that? And I also bring in his writings about liberty and revolutionary radicalism, which he very much is a part of. In other words, and I sometimes don't say founding fathers, because I don't know if you know that was an advertising slogan from Warren Harding's presidential campaign. One of his speechwriters came up with that.
No kidding.
I'll often say revolutionaries. That sounds better to me. Say among these revolutionaries, Jefferson is one of the most radical in terms of liberty. And he has writings, for instance, about the French Revolution. I'm going to paraphrase. The level of violence, may it be, if necessary, so high that only one Adam and one Eve are left. I should prefer that as long as they are free. Now, that's a revolutionary,
Right.
And we present this together, and I kind of have them sort of evaluate, and I'll hold up a whatever bill is with Jefferson's picture on it. Should he be on this bill, given what we've just understood about him? And students have different opinions on that, which then I say there's no right or wrong. I've had students say in several occasions, typically African-American students, is this okay if I say this? He's an asshole. In my view, that's nothing but an asshole. I don't want to see him, don't want to hear him. And I'll say, well, that's fine. That's totally fine in our context. And I understand exactly why you feel that way. Part of why it's fine is because of his revolutionary insistence that we have the liberty to say this kind of thing. In many countries, if you said that about, and even democracies, if you said that about a founding revolutionary, oh my goodness, you have talked about the president. Let's have a talk with you. And then he'd be taken out and taken to the president of a college and have a conversation. How can you say this about our founding? In many countries, that's very much the case. Here it's not, because paradoxically, of his insistence on this free range of thought and liberty. Although, obviously, the contradiction is the slaves he owned. So it's a complex and he's full of contradictions.
Yeah.
Deep contradictions. And you have to have the students face up to that. We look at issues of politics, of racial thinking. I do have them read Abraham Lincoln's, I don't know if you're familiar with his speeches he gave in Illinois in 1858, against Stephen Douglas, a Democrat. And Douglas is flatly racist, just hardcore, uses the N-word left and right. Lincoln is countering him and saying we must stop slavery from spreading. Lincoln's very emphatic about that. Same time he says, I don't believe their races are equal. I don't want blacks to marry whites. I don't want them able to hold office, blah, blah, blah. And so we discuss that and say, what are the differences between these two positions? To us, they both sound pretty hardcore racist, but there are differences in what they're saying about the future of the country. Let's unpick that.
So you've talked about how some of your students are just like, Thomas Jefferson's an asshole,
Yeah,
and they're getting very exercised about it. But you also make the point that you don't give a trigger warning when you're going to start talking about difficult material.
Well, I do say casually rough stuff.
Which I appreciate that a lot. But have you had students? Actually, I have kind of a two-pronged question. Have you had students come to you later and say, this was really difficult for me to hear, or this was really, do we have to use this?
No.
This kind of okay.
No.
So do you feel like it all kind of happens because you've created this sort of space where people can be very casual about what they talk about?
I think so.
Okay.
And I have good antenna. I mean, I'm not going to give you a formula, but in my years of doing this, I have very good antenna in how to monitor classroom controversies about things like that. And whether it's about politics or other issues like racial issues, things like that, I've never had a real outburst of real dislike among students. I've had it beginning to go there, particularly about party politics.
Right.
Several occasions I've had classes with students who were very emotionally anti-Republican before Trump was president, and since he's president, very emotionally anti-Trump. And some of these are older students who've taken every possible occasion to make a speech about the evil Mr. Trump.
Right.
And I can see other students who are, some of them I know are Republicans, getting agitated. And I will say to the outspoken ones, I understand, we have these feelings and opinions here, but we have to respect the fact that people in the class have other feelings, and we have to respect that. And present our case in a way that respects other people's views.
So that's how you diffuse those
That's how,
emotional
and it
moments.
always, I've never had a failure in that respect. Trying to think of other issues that have come up in terms of, it's difficult to think about all the different controversies that have arisen, but there have been quite a few,
Yeah.
and every one, I see it, and I don't squelch anyone. I allow them to present their cases, but I keep it civil, allow equal time or fair time for others, and everyone seems to leave satisfied.
So let me just ask, just hypothetically, like, so have you had moments when students have said racist things within the classroom?
Yeah.
So how do you handle that?
Well,
So-
I think I told you about this once. This is probably the worst example you're ever going to hear, and it was innocent. The intention I know was innocent, but this is about the worst thing you're going to hear. I had a African American history, Black history class with about maybe half and half white and black students. One student who I know this person at the time, very well intentioned and not malicious, asked the most uninformed question you could imagine, which was, "Isn't it true that black men have much bigger penises than white men?" In a very innocent, and it wasn't like a dig. He's just a very naive person.
How is this connected to history exactly?
Well,
Just-
it is, because we're talking about racism and caricaturing. We're discussing exactly that. And there was a hubbub, put it that there was in class, which I quickly calmed down.
Hullabaloo.
There was a hubbub, but it was not a bad hubbub. It was I heard the murmuring. Okay. I was able to. I used these hand gestures. Okay. I answered this question in a very calm way. I did not get in any way agitated by that, even though I didn't expect that to be. That was way out of left field, but here it came. I was very calm myself, and I would answer this question, which, no, it's not true, and he was satisfied with that. And you would expect the African-American students to be really offended, actually, because I think of my demeanor and because of the way I answered, and because I said, I know that person is not meant maliciously. Nobody was agitated or upset. There was murmuring, but nobody got angry. So it worked out well. And I've had other situations. Well, not here. I taught at Kutztown before here. I did have a female student ask in a World War II class, isn't it true that the Jews brought all that on themselves by showing off all that money? Well, how about no? And once again, I didn't.
Any
come
relation
at her,
to Mel Gibson?
I didn't come at her with like a angry response. You can't do that with a student. I was obviously not satisfied with what she was saying. I used facial language and body language to show I was very seriously not happy with that.
Right.
But I didn't come at her hard. I just simply said, that is not at all the case. Explained the research she could have done to show that. I kind of, after class, said, you can look at this and that to see how untrue that is. But I was able to, because once again, I'm jumping on it right away, making sure that those who were offended by that didn't get carried away with their offense. I was able to get that issue addressed, and the class carried on.
We had a former colleague. She hasn't been at the college in a number of years now, but I always remember what she said when someone said something that sort of egregious. And again, especially as you point out, oftentimes it's not. I mean, that one's rough. That Kutztown student that's rough to hear, but at the same time, it's not necessarily malicious. It's just really based on a lack of understanding. And her, I've always thought of this. I kind of use it, but she says she goes Columbo on them. So she would say something like, she'd sort of scratch her head and go, "Huh." Why do you think that? And, so if they said something like that, she would kind of get them to unpack it, similar to what you're saying, by not having your own internal emotional reaction to it, or for that matter, visible. I mean, you're probably having an internal emotional reaction, but not a visible emotional
You can
reaction.
get above it in a sense by saying, a lot of people do feel that.
Right.
What are the processes by which they've come to believe that? Let's interrogate them and connect them maybe to those caricatures of racism.
I think
that
that's
we've been
actually
talking
I
about.
think that's actually what I did. And that was years ago, but that's, I think, the way I went to try to answer the question. inform her better and guide the class to a better understanding of that. Because
Right.
I'm guessing she was the most blatant about it, but I'm betting in a class that was a 90-person class. Several other people were thinking
Oh,
the same
sure,
thing.
sure,
So
sure.
you answer them all at the same time by
That's-
answering her. Yeah.
You know, that's the benefit of something
Right.
like that
Right.
coming out in the
Right.
classroom is because then it can be talked about
Exactly.
openly.
And become a teachable moment, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing that made me think about has totally escaped me.
Well, I'll jump in because it made me actually. It reminded. I had a very similar experience when I myself was a student as an undergraduate at the College of New Jersey many moons ago. So let me tie that into a question we like to ask our guests: Is there was there a moment or experience that you had when you yourself was a student that was formative in kind of constructing who you've become as a teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I don't model myself on him, but Ed Baldridge, history professor at Muhlenberg College when I was an undergrad, was extremely knowledgeable and very funny. He was an older man, deep in knowledge, and his classes were run in a very irreverent way. The information was there, solid info, serious, often as, but always with humor. And one of the things he would always do was, and we recognized this very early on, any historical figure who died, we talked about the person's life, but they always died in a pool of blood, a beaten, broken man. This is among other Ed Baldridgeisms, with this little grin he would have, And I think what I got from him was, first of all, a sense of the depth of historical information out there that really was inviting. And secondly, you can treat it in a casual, irreverent way. And it's better that way, and to have fun with it. Have fun with it, I think, is what I got. And I don't behave exactly as he did. Like, really, not at all. You'd never see a resemblance. But the idea of having fun with history, I think I got from him. And it really informed my career academically.
And I think it also makes it come alive in the same way. It kind of makes me think of an article I was just reading about how we always think about, I was talking about period movies, right? And how so much of the acting in period movies, they all have to have that fake British accent, and they're all very,
Didn't know what you're talking about.
but they're basing it a lot on the fact that photographs of the time, people had to stand very still and not smile. So our perception is that everybody stood very still and didn't smile.
Right.
So I love that idea of that. Yeah, irreverence. Irreverence has always been a part of human interaction, and so to bring it to,
like, as a historian yourself. Do you actually like historical dramas, either like literary or film? Is there a favorite movie that you have, like representing a particular point in history that that you're drawn to as a historian, either because it represents something you're vastly interested in, or it did something very, very right or very, very wrong?
Wow, didn't expect that one. Most historical dramas have, they're good, they're interesting. Like, for instance, Lincoln. Spielberg's Lincoln from about, 5 or 6 years ago. Slow-paced movie, but I liked it presenting the issues of the day. And the characterization was really quite good. Really, Daniel Day-Lewis as, British actor, as this American prairie icon with that accent, you can think, it had a lot of errors in it. I can think of one big one, which was they had a peace conference between Lincoln and the Confederates in Virginia, which did happen. And the movie presented that as the Confederates asking, how soon can we get back in the Union so we can vote down the 13th Amendment? Which is exactly what not happened. The meeting broke down because the Confederates insisted, we will never rejoin your miserable country.
Doris Kearns Goodwin was weeping somewhere.
Exactly.
Wasn't that based on her team of rivals?
I think it was,
Part,
but the deep era. My God, and most historical dramas have errors of that kind, but you can still enjoy them because they make things in the past come alive. Like, for instance, I will sometimes show Gangs of New York, part of it, in class, the big fight scene. And it's not accurate because there typically weren't massive 100-person riots like that. But it does show the issues. And first of all, how the gang's dressed, which is top hats and fancy. And it does show the issues of Native American Protestants really against Irish immigrants. And the issues are presented there. So even if it's not that accurate, it shows the issues in a stark way, and students enjoy seeing that.
Admit it, you just like movies with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
I did remember what I was going to ask you, but and then I even wrote it down. But I also did want to say about the film Lincoln. I had read that voice that Daniel Day-Lewis uses was based on descriptions of Lincoln's
Yeah,
voice.
that's true.
So was that was
that's
true?
right.
Okay,
It's
I'm
a
glad that
high
was,
nasal voice with a
Yeah.
prairie twang accent.
Yeah, I'm glad that was accurate.
As best as we can know. I do sometimes play a clip. There's clips of Theodore Roosevelt making speeches. He was obviously in the recording area. And just like with Lincoln, people always thought Lincoln's voice in early movies was always deep and solemn, and of course it wasn't. People think Roosevelt's voice is going to be rough and tough, and it's not. He's an educated Ivy League guy, and when he speaks, his voice is like an Ivy League gentleman, exactly like that. And it always surprises my students. They'll say, "I didn't think he was going to sound like that," and because our sort of preconceptions aren't accurate. Yeah,
I think of the Hindenburg. Oh, the humanity! And if you hear the recording, it's very high pitched. But apparently, his voice wasn't high pitched at all. It was just the recording rate. The recording rate, sped it up.
Interesting. Okay.
Not surprising.
So what I wanted to ask you kind of just touched on, which
time's the
is
charm. Fourth
exactly,
time.
which is I know how many times by this point, which is kind of what you're touching on in the sense that we have these understandings of history that change as we get more information,
Right.
And it brings to mind the series that the New York Times did in honor of 400 years of a history of slavery. Where there is really this new interpretation of what the Civil War was about and the impact of slavery on the country. Just to use one example.
Yeah.
So do you talk to your students about that kind of historiography, basically?
Yeah, you really have to. Interpretation's key. One of the big ones, one of the real landmark ones, is Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Because that was a real valuable. Reconstruction, of course, is after the Civil War in the South, trying to remake Southern society. It fails in the wake of white democratic resistance. And for a long time, interpretation was North and South, very conservative. Well, it's good that it failed because and they'll use offensive terms, incompetent Negroes and Yankee carpetbaggers in positions of irresponsibility until the good citizens of the South took control back. That was the interpretation up until the 30s. And W.E.B. Du Bois, famous black sociologist, wrote a book called Black Reconstruction that was much more accurate. And since then, historians of all racial groups have really repainted Reconstruction. But it shows how the social biases of the time impacted, because the writing of the late 19th, early 20th century was based upon hardcore racism. Of course it failed because, and the assumptions would have been, non-whites can't govern themselves. Since the Civil Rights Movement, we sort of have a very different interpretation. You look at it and you see how it changes. And so I show my students, that's one of the, and other issues too, the Old West, understandings of reasons for warfare, things of that kind. So historiography plays a role.
Yeah.
It plays a role. If they were taking more advanced courses like four-year school or grad school, of course, you get more deeply into it. At this level, you have to bring it in, and it does inform the process and show them that this isn't a series of hardcore, settled interpretations. It's always going to be changing.
Do you feel like that surprises them, or do you feel like that makes sense to them?
I think it dissatisfies them because they want to see it more hardcore and concrete. And so it adds a level of dissatisfaction when you say that this is gooey and it might change.
Yeah. People don't like that uncertainty again.
Ambiguity.
And exactly. That ambiguity and contradictions for sure.
I'm whipping out my imaginary Wonder Woman lasso of truth now, right? Because this is Wonder Woman for all you geeks out there. I'm lassoing you, Brian, and pulling you out of the classroom and the teaching experience.
Okay.
I want to ask a question more broadly about higher education. So
sure.
Feel free to get in trouble now that the lasso of truth is around you.
Okay.
So how many years have you been here at NCC?
11 years.
11 years at NCC. You were at Kutztown before that.
4 years before that.
So you've been an educator for a long time at a 4-year institution, now at a community college.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you could change one thing about higher ed, anything, magic wand, what would it be?
Well, the big thing, obviously, is out of our purview. It's the cost. I think many students are very much aware of what this is all costing. And I hear talk about it sometimes. And we have to think in our classrooms about the anxiety, frankly, and some of them are experiencing, knowing how much this is all costing them, that loans are adding up, et cetera. If there was one way we could possibly address the cost issue, because it's really out of control. I mean, I think higher ed costs have gone up many, many times the rate of inflation. So that's one issue. Other than that, I'd like the preparation to be a little bit better. I think what we get in our classrooms shows what's happening in the K-12 system. And I don't know about other disciplines. I know in history they're coming in very unprepared. I mean, they're getting the minimal in civics or history. So it's frightening to think how many high school grads are not going to go to college and are going to live their lives in the world knowing how little they know. And it makes it difficult to be a real citizen, you know?
I'll throw this out to everyone. Do we have a sense of, towards the secondary and primary education experience, like why do we think that that's happening? I mean, what are we seeing at that level? You know, is it? I mean, we could look to No Child Left Behind. We could look to standardization and testing.
Yeah.
But there has been a shift. Some of it is placed like sociologically and culturally on the way we're raising children. There's a new book out, iGen, about the way we're raising, which generally focus them more on career and money and less against and away from intellectual curiosity. And so that might be mirrored in teachers.
Well, this came up on in an earlier conversation. I think it was the one that we had where you weren't here, unfortunately, Tom, but with Kelly and Kate Curry. This idea of not only No Child Left Behind and all of these standardized tests and sort of teaching toward these tests and teaching them, as Kate put it so beautifully, she felt this with her kids, and when she taught in the public schools in primary education, they want questions like, what color is the red wagon? Right? So again, it speaks to this idea of they want questions that have a black or white or red right answer, as opposed to open-ended questions and thinking about things in a less clear, more gray way.
Right. There's also political, which I was unaware of how severe it is, but K-12 is under great pressure not to address political controversies because I think politicians have a role and school boards have a role. I was just surprised, really surprised. I hate to indict a school district, but I'm going to go after one. One of my students, couple classes ago in my Civil War class, they were told specifically in discussing the Civil War, slavery was not a factor, and they must not bring up slavery as a factor because it might be. And the reason wasn't given, but I'm guessing because it might cause controversy. And I understand some southern districts are like that, but to have a Pennsylvania prestigious school district avoid that topic, and I'm guessing for the sake of not upsetting someone who might not want to think about that.
I want to just quickly ask you to return. Do you see a historical? I mean, you brought up cost in education.
Yeah.
I think about this constantly. How do we defray cost? How do we get more students and provide better education to those students? And that's historical. I mean, it feels like the history of education is really about denying those most in need and you know, to the masses.
Well, what's happened basically is that, you know, before World War II, colleges were very much elite. You know, I mean, we did have state colleges and land grant, and they were addressing some lower end people, but it wasn't ever as wide as it was after World War II. After World War II, the GI Bill expands education wildly, and it's more affordable, and everyone wants to go, so the pool of students is increased. And as time goes on, you know, the job market begins to demand college degrees for more and more positions that never used to require them. And then, for a host of reasons no one seems to be able to put their fingers on, last 20, 30 years, the cost goes through the roof of higher education, much higher than it was back in the 70s or 80s. And that's where we find ourselves. So now college educations are required for more and more careers, and they're becoming more and more out of reach. That democracy that we saw in the 70s or 80s of cost has evaporated. So it's a paradox.
It's ties back to what you said about citizenship. I really appreciated that point you made about, you know, a lack of knowledge about history, you know, and really being able to think about history, which is this, you know, being able to think critically about not just facts, but the interpretation of facts. Do you think that this is also in line with the political situation? Not to get into a discussion of politics, we don't have nearly enough time to do that. But I do wonder if maybe the political situation we're in now is kind of a combination of, or is due to a combination of factors that is also leading to this sort of elitism and ballooning of cost of universities and a lack of resources to public education. Like, I mean, I know this is a huge question, but it definitely is. It made me think that there must be connections, and you're the historian in the room.
Well, that's beyond my wheelhouse. I will say though, I did see before the 2016 election, in the years leading up to it, a high level of political disconnection among my students. I would ask who's going to vote 3 out of 20.
Yeah.
And that in those years, no interest and a feel of disconnect. And I ask, why do you feel so disconnected? Doesn't matter what I think. Their politicians will do what they're going to do. I'm not part of the process. It was almost like they were living in some sort of authoritarian regime. They just yielded to whatever the government's going to, and they didn't care, and they felt pushed around. Since that last election, which was very contentious, I've seen the level of political interest really go through the roof.
Oh, good.
So now I think, paradoxically, the 2016 elections actually increased political interests among all age groups, especially younger folks. Interesting. Yeah.
Somebody call it 538. You heard it here first.
Okay.
So that's for the statisticians in the room. But getting the youth vote out, that's exciting to hear. So at least we know your students are voting. God bless.
Well, I wouldn't say the majority, but a lot more than before.
Yeah.
A lot more than before. Now, I do maintain a nonpartisan classroom. You know, I tell them if I'm pushed, I am a Democrat. I'll tell everyone here. But I make very clear, and I say this over and over, that doesn't mean you have to be. And I have students of all particular types, and I will say this is nonpartisan. I'll bring up issues like that. In fact, and I'll look at it from different directions, but allow them to draw their own conclusions. I have seen professors, including at some very prestigious institutions, I was actually watching them teach, who didn't do that, who were very much indoctrinating in their particular views and sort of pushing them. I'm very energetic at not doing that.
Well, it's kind of the opposite of what we were talking about, which is to get them to think for themselves.
Exactly.
So and to have that open forum for everyone to be able to share views, and then get those views examined by people who have differing views. So,
right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say that we're reaching the end of our time, but we do have one really important question left for you, Brian, which is if you would share with us a non-guilty pleasure. In other words, is there something that you enjoy that you'd like to share with us that maybe people here at NCC don't know about you?
I'm a huge railroad fan. My students know that because I always talk about it. For some irrational reason, I've been a lifelong train buff since I was very small. And I've trained books. I look at railroad videos. I don't know if I've ever done it in the office with you, but I've done it at Monroe campus.
Yes, you have.
And my kids will hear this from the computer at home. Ding, 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 and he's doing it again, So that's one hobby I have.
Do you own a conductor's hat?
No, I do not.
Oh,
no.
That letdown.
That comes with retirement at some point. You do that. That's a hobby.
I will leave this interview envisioning you two ways. Just because you brought up marketing, I just stuck in a fedora and put you in Mad Men for a while through this interview.
Yeah.
And now,
fun show.
And now there's a train whistle going. And,
I think we also talked about the movie The Station Agent too.
Oh, that was a great movie.
Yeah,
that was
such
brilliant.
a great movie.
That is such a good movie.
Yeah.
Very, in every way. So many different ways. That was a great movie.
Yeah, and it's set in North Jersey? Is it North Jersey?
That's North Jersey.
Okay.
Along the Susquehanna Railroad. I know where that is. Yeah.
Oh,
and it was a
that's great.
Really, really good movie in so many ways.
Yeah.
Very small cast, but very, very good.
Yeah.
Peter Dinklage, Bobby Cannavale.
I did wonder
and Patricia
why
Highsmith.
Someone would park his hot dog wagon by essentially an abandoned train station and expect any business, but we won't. That's artistic license.
As the historian in the room, you had to find the flaw in the movie. Well, thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks,
has been
everyone.
a great conversation, a different one than the one we usually have every day in our office.
It was a total pleasure.
Pedagogy, go, go. Pedagogy, go, go, go. All right. Well, that was a fantastic conversation with Brian. I got to see facets of Brian that I don't normally get to see, just as colleagues in our shared office.
It is. I kind of expected, nothing else in a way. He's held some academic panels and stuff at the college. I remember one he did on multiracial identity, which was absolutely outstanding, where he brought guests in and just led this wonderful, in-depth, complicated conversation that was open to staff and faculty and students. So he does so much for this college. But I think there was a couple things I was really taken with that I just kind of want to highlight. The first of which that really resonated with me was his particular approach to history, which had a couple different different historical valences, right? From contextualizing the past as it might, as we assume it to have been understood then, and placing it in the context of socioeconomic standards, cultural beliefs about race, certainly, and the inherent racism of the time. But racism itself is a temporal construct in the sense that it moves and changes through time. And the way he opens that up to really informed conversations as we look back from a more modern paradigm into the past. So,
yeah, it strikes me as such a dynamic field, which I don't think that even I think about very often, in terms of history, how our perspectives are always changing based on, just new mores, new ways of thinking about what is and isn't normal, and all of those things. I also really like his approach to creating this kind of almost irreverent space in the classroom, and he says he doesn't give trigger warnings, but I mean, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I feel like in a way, his sort of ability to bring humor and irreverence lightens up even very difficult material. And so his ability to say, we're going to talk about some tough stuff today is the same as maybe a more serious professor saying, today we're going to talk about difficult subject, right? That is bringing his personality to bear, but it still becomes this safe space, for lack of a better word.
It was a lovely actual way to think about trigger warnings, because I think a lot about them. I taught Roxane Gay recently, who kind of writes a very powerful essay kind of complicating the idea of trigger warnings, identifying that there are spaces where we should have them, but there also might be spaces where we should not. And have we oversensitized ourselves in our classrooms, like when we're not teaching Huckleberry Finn because we're worried about the presence of the N-word in that novel, and we stop teaching an important piece of American literature, there might be a problem. And I think that Brian's approach to that is excellent, which is kind of a broad, we're going to hit some difficult material. He's built a safe space. I imagine that if a student felt uncomfortable, the space is such that student could leave. And he spoke about that in terms, I think this might have been off the show when he spoke about his veteran students and stuff, and who've suffered with PTSD. And they spoke about, hey, there might be some combat style violence in this clip if you want to absent yourself from the space.
Yeah, I mean, like he was talking in other contexts, it's all about sort of that ability to bring nuance into the space and to allow for there aren't going to be right or wrong ways of handling it. It's just going to be the best way in the moment that you handle something, and handling controversial material in the classroom. Another thing I really appreciated that Brian mentioned was the idea of, he expressed a little frustration about the fact that our students are underprepared, which is something we've heard from our other folks who've been on the podcast with us.
And when we say our students, I want to be specific. I don't think we're actually just speaking about students at this community college. I think in general, we're seeing nationally underprepared students entering college.
Right. And the fact that really does them a disservice in terms of them being able to participate as citizens in our democracy, in our social life, right? That it's kind of doing our whole society a disservice if we're not preparing them with a knowledge base, right? So yeah, it was a really great conversation.
It was amazing. What is that? Is that a knock at our podcast door? Who could that be?
Tom is really excited about these sound effects he's creating.
Is that a special guest? Mr. Kelly Allen?
I don't know how special, but
you're a showrunner. You're deemed very special. You can
Kelly.
You can fire our sorry asses anytime you want. What brings you here today, Mr. Kelly Allen?
I want to find out what's in that Tumblr of yours. Holy crow.
But nobody knows won't hurt him.
I just want to say it's great to be back in the studio with you all and just starting another exciting semester of Pedagogy A Go-Go. But as showrunner, I'm always trying to think ahead, what direction are we moving in? And I know that one of the things that we have in store for us this summer is the episode where the four of us get together and just talk about, like where we've been. And I don't know if you all recall, but one of the tasks that I've kind of given myself is to kind of see what thread is going through our episodes that we could use as like a thematic starting point for that episode. But then something interesting happened over winter break. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to not do that, because we're totally going to do it. I haven't been taking notes for nothing. But something interesting happened over winter break, and it occurred within an email exchange that we had been having. And I know this is a podcast, so our listeners can't see that I'm looking at Gina here. That
Definitely not looking at me.
Oh, why would you say that? Anywho, no, but Gina, you brought up in one of the emails that you had started listening to Jeff's podcast.
Yes.
And let me see if I can bring it up here on my little device here.
Compliment Jeff's podcast highly enough. So yeah. But go on, Kelly.
Well, it's funny that you just shared that with us, because as we all know, like, you are kind of our master of transitions, and that transitions perfectly into what it is that I'm about to say. But before I do you mind if I read what you wrote to us?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So so what you say in this email is, I have been catching up on Jeff's podcast, The Neurotransmission, over the break. Firstly, Jeff, you are a wonderful interviewer, and these are so engaging. I confess I hadn't listened in a while, and then you have in parentheticals, my podcast listening tends to be escapist, and then pop culture, music, and disturbing crimes. Gina.
Very true.
And I'm kicking myself. Some great material to use for teaching, so thank you and well done. So this got me thinking. Now, I know, Gina, that we run into each other in the hallways quite often, and we share like music, TV shows, and whatnot. But like, when looking at ourselves here at Pedagogy A Go-Go, we really don't talk with each other about the podcasts that we listen to. So we're here comes the English professor in me. Like, we're engaged in a genre, and I'm really curious to know, like, what influences like you might be consuming that kind of tell you like how to perform here as we are creating our own podcast. So I'm asking a favor. So it's not homework and it's not extra credit, but I'm just asking a favor that during our summer episode, if you all could share with us and our listenership 2 podcasts that you really enjoy listening to, and why.
Oh,
and I'm not
absolutely.
looking for like your favorites, because then we get into like this like subjective like judgment thing, but just like, what are you listening to and why? Because like when you shared in that email that you listen to podcasts for escapist purposes, like for me, when I listen to podcasts, it's to like, I'm doing it for education. So
I am now going to give you your extra credit, Tom. And because I am so struck with this idea of how disciplines change over time, I'm interested in how you talk about how perspectives have changed in your discipline. So you're teaching women and gender studies, right? So clearly, there's obviously the waves of feminism, but there's other critical theory in that area that I think it would be really interesting to hear how you address the ways thinking has changed over time in this discipline. And then maybe I will share a little bit about how I address that in psychology, because there is, for example, there's the whole replication, disaster that's been happening in recent years in psychology that we've had to address in the classroom. So that is your extra credit.
All right, that's a great assignment. It's dangerous because I could probably wax poetic for about 40 minutes on that. So
Well, you have 3.
right. Okay, that's the challenge there. There's the homework. I got it. Pare down. Brevity is the soul of wit. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom.
Hey, thanks for listening to Pedagogy A Go-Go, recorded in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our podcast daydreamer/showrunner is Kelly Allen, and Pedagogy A Go-Go is produced by Jeff Armstrong. If you've got any questions, please send them to pedagogyagogo@gmail.com. Our social media handle is @pedagogyagogo, and you can stop by our website at www.pedagogyagogo.com for copies of podcast transcripts, guest assignments, and other useful tidbits. Keep in mind there are no hyphens or dots in any of the above web addresses. Until next time, this is Gina and Tom saying, take care and teach well.